Hey, what's up, guys? So, before we start with the MTT course and getting into the nitty gritty of it, I thought it would be interesting to talk about why we need theory in tournaments at all. For some of you, this might be kind of a funny question because you'll be like, obviously, you need to have a theoretical foundation. But for a lot of people, this is not as obvious as a question as it seems like. I think in tournaments, people have sort of always had this feeling that every spot is very unique. And so, therefore, you can just use that to justify any play you want. I think we've all sort of, had those handles where we justify some play that we normally wouldn't make because we say, well, I had this dynamic with this guy, and we just go on, completely butcher a hand. And I think a lot of people would argue that tournaments are just about feel. Every spot is very different. It's not cash where every spot is the same 100 big blind spot just in a different position. Tournaments, the stack sizes are constantly changing. The situation of the tournament is always changing in terms of ICM and final tables, stuff like that. So you could make some people would make the argument, hey, tournaments are just all about feel, and you got to figure out what you're doing in every spot in a different way. And there's no reason to have a strong fundamental basis because you can't really apply that to the same situation over and over again. MTTs are about soul reading, etc. Things like that. There's a hand where a couple weeks ago at Bay 101, I opened aces off of 25 blinds and the button 3-bet me, and he'd just been playing pretty tight. I mean, obviously I had aces, so I trapped. We're always trapping aces. So anyway, I trapped, and it goes to showdown. He has like 9-7 off, and I don't think the guy is 3-betting 9-7 off every time button hijack. I mean, he played pretty straightforward all day. It's just he just thought it was a good spot, and that's how people play tournaments. They think, hey, let's just do this because it feels like a good spot, or they get bored, especially in live tournaments. That's actually something you can't underrate is boredom, but this guy had no reason. Like, what happens if I flat? Like, what if I have queen 10 suited and flat? Like, what's he gonna do with 9-7 off post flop? Like, it's just such a bad hand. Like, you have to account for those types of situations. You can't just assume that you're so smart and you've picked up this like great spot that you're gonna 3-bet and it's just always gonna work, and therefore the cards you have don't matter. Like, that's just not how it works. I think this sort of thinking used to be pretty common in heads up and six max cash as well, but it's largely been killed off as the best players have just had stronger fundamentals and just use that to just take all the money from those field players. Especially like online cash is almost dead in so many ways just because of how good people are fundamentally. I think a lot of people are going to still be like, hey, like, I get that we're not, we don't want to just do random stuff, but I mean, it's still like tournaments, man. Like we can just do whatever. It's like every spot is still unique. And while I agree in some ways that I think there's always going to be reason to make adjustments from your default, it's important to know what those defaults are, and that means having a strong foundation in your game. So that means knowing sort of what your default preflop ranges are if you don't know anyone at the table. It means knowing why you're barreling the turn, or like what types of hands you like to barrel and why. It means knowing why you're c-betting, and that doesn't mean just because you were the pre-flop raiser and Antonio told you on the one-drop coverage you need to like c-bet every single time. You have to have good reasons for why you're c-betting. It means calling rivers even though you think the guy's never ever bluffing, which is a common tournament thing to think. There's actually a hand from last year's 300K where I bet folded the river with two pair versus Negreanu, and I have to be honest, like in that moment I let MTT thinking just get into my head. Wasn't thinking about where I was in my range. I wasn't thinking about whether I had good blockers, whether he would be bluffing, what percentage of the time does he need to be bluffing here to call, etc. All I was thinking was, this guy is not bluffing here. And it's not because don't think someone like Negreanu is capable. Obviously he is. It didn't feel like a spot that people were bluffing, feel like a spot. And I folded very quickly, actually, even in retrospect. And it was just because it was just this glaring sort of MTT logic that was stuck in my brain, even after a couple of years of, trying to get better at this kind of stuff. It was still just, it felt like, oh, I can't call the river. People just don't bluff here, blah, blah, blah. And, 30 minutes later on the live stream, he was bluffing, and he got me good. And I think it was a great example where even though I pride myself on my fundamental play, I just sort of let myself revert to bad MTT logic. This also goes for like bluffing rivers. I think all of us have sort of been there on the river with eight high, like maybe eight high missed straight draw or something, and we're just thinking like, oh, should we really bluff here? Like, the guy's never folding. If he's calling turn, he's calling river. This is like the favorite MTT logic, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, if the guy was always calling river after calling turn, you could just completely own someone exploitively, and it doesn't even happen in reality. Like, I think in my database, I think people fold to a river three barrel 50% of the time, and you don't even need it to work that often. And if you search your memory, you'll remember that too. You just only want to remember the times you bluffed it off and they called and you were out of the tournament or whatever. But you just have to be able to bluff if you want to become a great player. So the most important thing is just in the general idea of you must have a strong foundation if you really want to be a good player. I think so then some people might be asked, hey, like aren't there room for exploits? Like we don't want to be just robots, especially in tournaments, right? And especially yeah, and yeah, I agree. In live tournaments, you're gonna have a lot of information where you can definitely make a lot of exploits. And as if you get a good sample size online, you can do the same. So I'm not saying that there's no room for exploits. I think the best way to be a great player in 2017 is to have strong fundamentals. Then you make exploits and adjustments as you gain information, and then use that to ship all the money. That's what all the great players now do. Guys like Nick Petrangelo, Fedor Holtz, David Peters, guys like that. All of those guys aren't just feeling around in every spot like, oh, do I feel like opening king eight off today in the low jack? They have strong fundamentals, and then yeah, of course they make exploits and adjustments, and that's what you got to do. Like you make the adjustments, but you're not just going completely off the reservation and opening 10-2 off in the low jack because you feel like it's a good spot. Uh, you're you're using your fundamentals to build a very strong foundation of your game, and then you really, the exploits are sort of the icing on the cake to take you to the next level. I think the big thing about this course is we're going to learn a lot about the fundamentals, but also learn about what sorts of things we should be looking at when we're exploiting. So I think this is going to be a great learning opportunity, and I think it's going to be really fun to start working on these fundamentals together. All right, I'll talk to you guys in the next video, which will be talking about pre-flop ranges.